You can find wild garlic, ramps, or chives to forage in almost all states and provinces, and wild radish in even more. Welcome back to Primitive Organic Garden. Today we're going to be making 2-ingredient winter warming soup with just 2 things that you can forage pretty much anywhere, not have to buy. One's going to be wild onion or chives, some people call them ramps. Sometimes they're wild garlic chives, or you can generally find some type of wild allium anywhere. But I'm just messing with y'all. This is actually ryegrass that's spilled in a wheelbarrow. If you want to see the very subtle differences between grass and wild onions, you can look in this cell here, which has both. This is a chive, and right next to it is some ryegrass. If you're ever wondering, you can always do the smell test. There's a lot of things in nature that might look like wild onion or wild garlic, but if you smell it, you're going to be 100% certain that it's an allium. So yeah, I would definitely do the smell test if you're new to foraging wild alliums like chives and ramps. There are plenty of things that look like chives and ramps, but anything that smells like onion or garlic is going to be safe to eat. The other one we're going to look at today is wild radish or some wild mustard. You could use either one of those in this stew. Both of those can be found pretty much anywhere. Sometimes wild radish will have like a decent sized root on it, especially if you're in a colder place, but a lot of times wild radishes will be mostly just leaves, but that's fine. So yeah, we're going to look around and find some. There's definitely wild onion around this area. There's some like chives that volunteered next to this clover. I'm actually going to cheat and cut down a giant leek for my version of this stew today because I have lots of leeks. But again, you could totally use wild chives or garlic or wild ramps, and it would probably even taste better. I got tons of radishes around here. I sow radish as a cover crop, so I generally just come out and throw seed everywhere, and whatever comes up, comes up. A lot of my radish plants tend to just make a lot of leaves and not a whole lot of roots. That's fine. You can see these here have plenty of leaves on them. There's actually very little root matter down there though. There's the leeks next to them that I'm going to use in my stew. These radishes over here, for some reason, made a little bit more respectable roots. That's probably a decent sized radish for soup for one person. That's not enough greens for soup for one person though, so I'm probably going to take this root and then take some leaves off of some other radishes. Again, you could also use wild mustard. I have some mustard plants over here that I could take some leaves off of. Those are gigantic, but mustard's got a much stronger flavor than the daikon radish greens I'll be using. So I'll probably just take some more daikon greens. Then we're going to take one of these leeks and we're just going to boil the leeks, including all the leafy material. That's some of the best part. Don't just use the root, use all the leafy material. We're going to boil that in water with the radish and the radish greens, and we'll add a little bit of bacon grease for flavor, but if you save your own bacon grease, that's a free ingredient too. So yeah, this soup has cost me literally nothing, and it's going to be delicious. Welcome back. We are now doing the harder part, which is cooking the garlic, leeks, ramps, whatever have you, and mustard or radish. Growing them or foraging them is definitely the easy part, in my opinion. So we're gonna wash that root off pretty good. The greens look fairly clean. I don't think we'll need to wash those. We're just going to drop those in the stock pot here. The leek is a little trickier. A lot of times leeks have dirt on them. We're also going to have to peel off some of those outer layers, and there's some like dead leaves on here we don't really want. We got a second radish just to give the stew a little bit more bulk material. This has got almost as much greens as the other one. Just got dirt in the pot. Got our radish cut up fairly nicely, the small pieces. We also mostly wash the dirt off the leek. There's some cool parts of the inner leek that are like a yellow color where they don't receive sunlight. It's kind of interesting to look at. I'm gonna break the leeks up into really small pieces. You could just leave these gigantic leaves in here whole and then fish them out later if you didn't want to eat them. Maybe we'll break up some of the small pieces and eat them, and then just leave some of these massive pieces in here and then fish them out later. I don't know. It's a lot of leek to eat. I read recently that eating too much alliums, garlics, leeks, onions can actually be bad for your liver, but they also help keep away colds and flus, so mixed bag there. So we decided, since this is way too much leek for one person, we're going to be leaving the massive pieces, especially some of the more fibrous pieces. I want to say this leek is probably like 2 years old, probably about to flower. But yeah, we're gonna just leave these in here whole and then probably fish them out before we serve the stew. We got quite a few of these giant pieces here, and then the smaller, more tender pieces we're going to cut up really finely and leave those in when we serve it. You can see the color contrast there, the inner portions that are yellow, the outer portions that are dark green. I think leeks are probably my favorite allium to grow. As much as I really enjoy foraging wild chives and ramps, which grow pretty much everywhere, they're often just small. I mean, if you find a large patch of them, you can have quite enough, but each individual wild leek or ramp chive thing is just pretty small, which can make, harvesting a little more tedious. I like to grow leeks and let them over summer in the shade, and in the second winter you get these like massive leeks that could feed 10 people. I'm getting tired of cutting these. Alright, I'm boring myself. We're just going to toss the rest of these in here whole and fish them out later. Lastly, we got our radish greens. You could use wild mustard greens or wild radish. You could use dandelion greens if you really wanted to, and that's all you could find, but I think wild radishes and wild mustard are a lot more common than dandelion. Dandelion also probably doesn't have much of a flavor component, and since this stew has so few ingredients, I think something with a little stronger flavor is more appropriate. And you can see I'm just putting the stems in here as well in pieces. If you were using a wild radish or wild mustard that had really tough woody stems, you might not want to put them in here, but since this is a cover crop daikon, it's got, you know, pretty juicy tender stems, and daikon leaves are amazing. They're so soft and tender you could eat them completely raw. It's the only radish I've ever seen where the leaves were like soft and palatable. These aren't super bitter yet because we've still been having temperatures in the low 30s. If radishes and mustards are exposed to heat, they tend to get woody and bitter. We have had some days in the 60s, but it's been consistently cool at night, and so these are still fairly tender and juicy and fairly mild. The heat can also bring out spiciness in wild mustard and radish in addition to bitter compounds. Speaking of bitter, we're not going to use olive oil for this because there's already too many bitter things in here, like the radish and the mustard. Even the leeks, to an extent, can be a little bitter since they're on their second year. So we're going to use either butter or bacon grease. I said this was going to be a free, no-cost stew, so butter does get expensive, so I'm going to use bacon grease since that's free. Got my trusty mason jar completely full of bacon grease. I'm going to put a fairly sizable portion in here, even though this is only soup for one person, me. You could probably feed a family of 4 with this if they don't all have incredible appetites like I do. So yeah, I mean, I'd say that's probably 2 to 3 tablespoons of bacon grease there. Hopefully we have some cardiologists in the audience today. Although I have seen that one dude on Twitter who's like a carnivore doctor. He'd probably approve of this, even though there's no meat in it. It's nothing but fresh, non-starchy vegetables and bacon grease. We're gonna put a little bit of salt in here. I usually use pink salt. You could use whatever you want. I like the pink salt because I heard the ocean's full of plastic, so I don't use sea salt anymore. That's probably way too much salt, but it's alright. Alright, well, we'll check back in when this is boiling. We've now let our stew simmer for about an hour. Probably the longer the better. Now's a good time to add some more butter or bacon grease. I think we're going with bacon grease today so that we could say this was a completely free soup. No financial cost here. We're going to be fishing out some of those gigantic pieces of leek pretty soon. Or maybe we won't. Add a little bit more salt here if we wanted to. I'm just going to cover this and turn the eye off. Let it sit for another 20 or 30 minutes or so. But yeah, so that's our free winter warming stew with either wild mustard, wild radish, or radishes out of your garden, some wild onions, chives, garlic, leeks, ramps, whatever you like there. Delicious, very healthy, no money. I think I did throw a couple of grains of rice in here. Yeah, I sure did. I mean, rice is essentially free too. You can buy a 2-pound bag at the dollar store and get 15 meals out of it. Yeah, this is going to be great, and we're going to have some homemade sourdough bread as well. But I don't know anything about baking, so don't expect me to make a how-to video on sourdough.